now going to cover what a fragment is. Fragments are really a fairly general description of a basic fault. It's a fault to really complete the independent clause. Keep in mind with the definition of a sentence, the one I've given you, grammatically you must have an independent clause. With a fragment, you've made a grammatical error, not a stylistic one. It's a grammatical error in where you somehow don't finish the independent clause. In most cases, most students make one of two errors. You could write a phrase, but that's not a very common type of error. Most students make one of two errors. They either have an incomplete subject or verb, the subject or verb is incomplete, or they write a dependent clause. You can write a fragment as a phrase. A prepositional phrase would count as a fragment. A gerund phrase would count as a fragment. These don't happen very often, so I won't bother covering them. Instead, the most common two types of fragments are these types. The subject or verb is incomplete, or you write a dependent clause and punctuate it as an independent clause. So in the first one, it is usually a case the student didn't read over his or her work carefully enough. That's what it usually is. You could have a sentence such as this: Louis arriving late for class. Well, to most folks, if you listen to it, you know something's missing. Something's missing and part of the verb is missing. Louis is your subject, arriving is your verb, but arriving can't sit by itself. It needs a helping verb with it, something like is. For this, most students just need to slow down and read through what they've written, and they can catch this. So in this case, the fragment is because the subject or verb is incomplete. In most cases, it's a helping verb that didn't arrive to help out the action verb or the linking verb. So you need the helping verb to help out the main verb. Okay? So that's usually an oversight from a student rushing or writing too fast and not slowing down and reading his or her work. So that's usually not a matter of not understanding it, but of just rushing. Okay? The next type of fragment is the dependent clause fragment. This is something like, when Louis arrived late for class. Now this verb, subject and verb, is complete. Louis is the subject. Arrived is a complete verb. You can use arrived alone as the verb. And notice that sounds fine. Those click together. Louis arrived. That makes sense. This, however, with the word when at the front, is a dependent clause. And if you go back to that definition of a sentence, it must have an independent clause, and you say it's a sentence. This doesn't have an independent clause right now. This subordinating conjunction turned this whole thing into a dependent clause. There are two ways to solve this issue. Now, you may have often been told that it's an incomplete thought. And again, I don't like that that definition of a sentence as a complete thought, so I don't like fixing it by saying it's an incomplete thought and needs to be completed. Because there's really two ways to fix it. You can turn this dependent clause into an independent clause simply by getting rid of the word when. It is now an independent clause. Louis arrived late for class. The problem with that idea of this being an incomplete thought is that if you take something away, wouldn't that incomplete thought be even less complete? Well, no, it's actually now grammatically correct. Oftentimes when you do that, you end up with a very short sentence, however. So what you can do is, complete it or develop it by adding an independent clause to it, either before or after. So we can add it after here. When Louis arrived late for class, comma, he sat down quietly. He sat down quietly is an independent clause. It could stand alone. It could be a sentence all by itself. It could go to the front or to the back. I could say Louis sat down quietly when he arrived late for class. That's the independent clause. That makes this a sentence. It's no longer a fragment. So you can fix a dependent clause fragment either by taking away the subordinating conjunction or by adding an independent clause to it. As long as you keep that definition of a sentence in mind, it has an independent clause, and you say it's a sentence, you shouldn't have a problem with this. As long as you can go back and make sure you have that independent clause, it's complete, or you have it, you should be in good shape and not run into any trouble with it. Okay? Take care.